So, more on orgastic potency. Orgastic potency is the capacity to surrender to the flow of biological energy, free of any inhibitions, the capacity to discharge completely the dammed up sexual excitation through involuntary, pleasurable convulsions of the body. So, in simple terms, it's an orgasm that is instinctual, that has no social constraints on it, that has no inhibitions involved in it. Basically, if you're in this state, it's your body goes into, and your being goes into a full instinctual mode, to where you're fully in the present moment. The orgasm is not just in the genitals, it's in your entire body. The entire body feels this as a movement of being. And there's a lot of different ways to kind of figure out if you've had this before. First of all, if you're in the sexual act and your mind is going somewhere else, like, oh my gosh, what do they think of what I'm doing, or how am I performing, or how do they smell, or I like this, or I don't like that. Any kind of thought that enters into that process, especially during the orgasm, is basically an inhibition. Fantasies are also an inhibition, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Simply because the fantasy is actually not reality, and you're actually in reality at the moment. And so when you fantasize, you're actually disconnecting from the reality of the moment, even if fantasy is beautiful and shared by both people and all that. So orgastic potency is, to Wilhelm Reich, is actually the cure for all of our neuroses, all of our pathological problems, and some of the psychological fragmentation that happens in people, such as like schizophrenia, and just trauma that's happened to the psyche of a young person and needs to be repaired. Okay, so moving on. I'll just talk more about the way, the energetics of the orgasm. So obviously when the genitals get stimulated and get aroused, that primal drive is activated. And what's supposed to happen in an instinctual full body orgasm is it starts in the genitals, and that gets stimulated and turned on, and then that gets completely enveloped in waves of energy, waves of pleasure, basically. And those waves fill the entire genitals of both the male and the female. And then those waves build up, and they reach a high intensity. And at a certain point, the intensity gets so high that those waves spill into the entire body. And it's like a pool of water. They refract around the body, and then they get more and more and more intense as these waves of energy crisscross and collide with each other. And this is actually similar to the way that light or sound works as well. Light waves, sound waves, water waves all do the same thing. And that energy, especially with light, can, especially in the pineal gland, if it's electrically charged, with enough charge, it amplifies and actually reaches a sort of a critical mass, a critical point, and then discharge happens psychically in the pineal gland. But we're talking about the human body. So the orgasm is obviously linked to your emotions, your physical body, as well as your mind or psychic body, and even your spirit. So when the full body has this energetic frequency ramped up to a point of such intensity, it triggers an instinctual physical discharge, an orgasm. And so when that orgasm happens, you're actually discharging sexual energy out of the body. And of course, this energy is charged enough to create life. The orgasm of both the man and the woman actually help to fertilize the egg. The whole process of contractions and convulsions pull the fluid inside into where the egg can be fertilized, and that is charged with electricity, because our bodies are creating electricity. Our heart runs off electricity, our nervous system has electrical impulses, and of course so does our sexual discharge. And of course, in this state, a real full body orgasm is actually a cure for neuroses. And the reason why this is a cure is because, for one, it's instinctual, primal, and natural. And we've sort of fallen away from natural, according to Wilhelm Reich. And you can see this in the way that we treat nature. We're sort of kind of like destroying Mother Nature at the moment. And so we are in disharmony with it, and so it's actually just a reflection of the way we are within ourselves. So that's something to be aware of as well. The reason why this is a cure is because, and this is the most, for me, it's really important part, is that as the child's mind forms and their genitals are stimulated, ideally, the way that it's supposed to happen is that you are the very first person who's supposed to be the cause of your own genital pleasure. And in so many cases around the world, it's the child's mother or father that's the first person to stimulate that primal function in the body. So there's something right there that can begin to cause a mild neuroses. But then the biggest one that happens to the Western world, the most common, and you can talk to other psychoanalysts or psychologists or even psychiatrists that would probably confirm this if they have done any real heavy research into sex economy, is that even if a child is the first person to discover their pleasure principle in their genitals, they usually go tell their parents or someone else because it's fascinating and it's brand new and it's very powerful. And most of the time in the Western world, the response that comes from an adult or an authority figure is negative, where they say, oh, don't do that, or you shouldn't do that. Or some people would say, oh, that's even bad. Or basically the response, if it's not just a beautiful celebratory response, the child is going to feel it in their emotional body, and they're going to associate a negative emotion with the most pleasurable part of their physical existence. And that right there is unnatural and sets up a huge psychological paradigm for neurosis, and more neurosis if this kind of thing continues and if it's never dealt with. And so this is why you'll find lots of people in the Western world cannot reach full orgastic potency, and that they can still have orgasm and they can still enjoy the sexual act, but there's all these neurotic features that come with it. Most importantly is deep into their subconscious, and most people aren't even aware of it. In their subconscious mind, they have a negative association with their own genitals because they're neurotic. And it's surprising how common this is when you look at the Western mind and the Western psychology and the Western practices and then the way we run our Western society. And I'm not really critiquing the Western society as being better or worse than others, because I'm a Westerner and I think that it's beautiful and brilliant. You just have to know where to look, and you have to read the great thinkers, the great minds. And these great thinkers are just not celebrated or taught near enough, because our educational system is not interested in celebrating the human being. They're interested in making us obedient workers, and maybe even somewhat robotic. But anyway, full orgastic potency is actually the cure. And the cure for, according to these guys, all neuroses. So your OCDs, your anxieties, your pathologies, all of them can be basically linked to the way in which you as a child formed your psychic bond with your own genitals. Sounds funny, sounds strange, but if you really think about it, and if you do your own research, I think you'll find that these guys are correct. These guys are right. So going on. The clinical experience shows that as a result of the universal sexual suppression, men and women have lost the ability to experience the ultimate surrender to the involuntary. It is precisely this previously unrecognized phase of final excitation and resolution of tension that I have in mind when I speak of orgastic potency. It constitutes the primal and basic biological function which man has in common with all living organisms. All experiencing of nature is derived from this function, from our longing for it. Again, orgastic potency being primal and natural. The ability to focus the entire affective personality upon the orgastic experience, in spite of any contradictions, is another characteristic of orgastic potency. Again, he's saying here, it's a full body thing. You're fully present. There are no inhibitions, and you're not thinking of anything else. even subconscious. He goes on to say a little bit more about like the inhibition side and the way that the psyche can be neurotic when it comes to sexual energy. If every psychic illness has a core of dammed up sexual excitation, it can be caused only by the disturbance of the capacity for orgastic gratification. Hence, impetus and frigidity are the key to the understanding of the economy of neuroses. The energy source of the neuroses is created by the difference between the accumulation and discharge of sexual energy. So there you have it. Oftentimes, the sexual energy will build up inside a human, inside the body, due to some sort of stimulus or trigger, and then it's not completely released in full orgastic in that way, in a full instinctual way. And so some of that energy gets pent up in the body. And he says it manifests in all kinds of different neuroses, and I can't go into all those, but some of these things can be reflected in just our relationships, like things like nagging is a disturbance of sexual energy on both sides, and also large amounts of cognitive dissonance where you emotionalize or rationalize some things that are not important and make them way more important as they are, and then fight over them or argue over them, that sort of thing. That happens a lot in relationships. And of course, when children are around, this just spills over into them and helps perpetuate their own neuroses. So aggressiveness is one of them. What else? Socially induced sexual inhibition, that sort of thing. He goes on to say, Freud's therapeutic formula for neuroses, though correct, is incomplete. The primary prerequisite of the therapy is to make the patient conscious of his or her repressed sexuality. This alone does not cure. It can, but it does not of necessity do so. Making the patient conscious of his or her repressed sexual impulses guarantees cure when this also eliminates the energy source of those neuroses, the sexual stasis. In other words, this kind of therapy brings about a cure when the consciousness of the instinctual demands also restores the capacity for full orgastic gratification. In this way, the pathological proliferations are deprived of the source of their energy, the principle of energy withdrawal.